Hey friend, we have arrived at session 5 in our timeline to the empty tomb. The hour has come for Jesus to be delivered into the hands of men. Jesus is currently praying in agony in the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Most of his core disciples are nearby. At least 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, have succumbed to the wine and the late hour, and they are fast asleep. Now, where are we in the chronology here? Jesus praying in the garden, his arrest and trial most likely occurred between the hours of 11-ish p.m. Thursday evening through 8-ish a.m. on the day that most churches call Good Friday. These events are in every gospel, and as usual, we will be jumping around a bit. So if you are up for it, feel free to grab some bookmarks and find the passages in your own Bible. Here is where we're going to be. Let's go. To understand the chaos of this night in the most orderly way, we can really break up these 9-ish hours into 3 sections. Jesus' arrest, Jesus before the Jewish authorities, and Jesus before the Roman authorities. Now, obviously, we don't know the exact time frame of this night. What we do know is that by 9 a.m. on Friday morning, Jesus is hanging on a cross. So let's jump into Mark 14, starting at verse 41. Jesus has just awakened his dearest friends for the 3rd time, and it says, returning the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now, who is in this crowd? We're not totally sure, but it seems the religious leaders have rallied and turned a good-sized group of men against Jesus. Men that are willing to be violent in the darkness of night. This is a mob. Verse 44. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." A kiss on the cheek as a greeting was very common in Jewish life. We see this in the Old Testament as well. Aaron greets his brother Moses with a kiss after a long absence. The prophet Samuel greets Saul with a kiss on the day Saul becomes king. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Now this begins the chaos of the night. We get the picture that Jesus' disciples jump in to try and save him. There is a brawl. There are swords drawn. One fisherman, who will remain nameless, cuts off the ear of a servant named Malchus. And Jesus is actually the one who calls out his disciples and says, "Put the swords away. Did I not tell you that this must happen?" Jesus then turns to the mob standing before him and he says, "Am I leading a rebellion?" said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Is this who you think I am? I've been in the temple courts every day this week, sitting in a chair, teaching in front of some of you, and this is how you do this?" Jesus is trying to get them to think, but Jesus also knows the scriptures must be fulfilled. As the prophets wrote long before this, "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. By a perversion of justice, he was taken away, and the sheep will be scattered." Sure enough, then everyone deserted him and fled. Now, what time is it? 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. But this is what the religious leaders wanted, right? To capture Jesus when the crowds were away. Well, everybody's just celebrated the first meal of Passover. They've had a lot of wine, and most of them are asleep. So, first stop, they bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Now, this whole relationship between Annas and his son-in-law Caiaphas is probably an awkward one. Certain Roman officials removed Annas from office over a decade before this, and they gave the title of high priest to his son-in-law Caiaphas. However, it seems Annas still has a lot of clout with the leaders, because as you can see, they take Jesus to Annas first. But this conversation doesn't seem to last long. It's only recorded in the Gospel of John. Annas very quickly seems to pass Jesus off to his son-in-law. As it says in Matthew, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. Now, we must realize nothing about Jesus' trial before the religious leaders was fair by Jewish law. None of it. For one, Jesus' trial was conducted at night, which was illegal according to their laws. Number two, cases involving serious charges were supposed to happen in the meeting space of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council. They're not in a meeting space. They're in Caiaphas' living room. Third, their law stated, innocent till proven guilty. Well, everybody here feels he's guilty already. Not to mention their whole trial in their pajamas in the middle of the night is based on false witnesses who are intentionally twisting things Jesus has said. For instance, then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. No. Let's rewind. Now, they are referring to a moment recorded in John 2 where Jesus has just flipped over tables in the temple courts because of their greed. And Jesus says, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. Jesus was implying if you destroy this temple, which their behaviors would do 40 years later, little did they know, then Jesus said he could raise up another temple in 3 days, which was him, because Jesus is the true presence of God. But it didn't matter. This is why we read several times that Jesus was mostly silent during all of this. Because if you don't want anything to do with Jesus, then you're not going to come close to hearing what he's actually trying to say. Eventually, though, Caiaphas comes out and blatantly asks him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus says, I am. Now, in that moment, Jesus uses the most holy name in the Jewish world for the Lord God, Yahweh. He says, I am the Lord. And with this, everyone in the room erupts. Guilty! Kill him! He deserves to die. It's blasphemy to them. That's his crime. One little problem, though. If they want him executed, they're going to have to get Rome to do it, because the Romans are the ones who have perfected crucifixion, the ultimate torture of the day. And that is what these religious men want for Jesus. So this moves us to the hour of 5-ish a.m., 6 a.m. maybe. John 18:28 tells us, "Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now, it was early morning." Now, getting the Romans to condemn Jesus was going to be tricky. The Romans don't care about a Messiah. That is a Jewish belief. Jesus can say, "I am," all the livelong day. The Romans aren't going to execute him for that. They're not Jewish. So the chief priests have to convince this Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, that Jesus is guilty of something else. So they're going to go for treason. That's their plan. As the Gospel of Luke records, they began to accuse Jesus, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar." And they say he is calling himself a king. Emperor Caesar is the only king. Now, as we walk through these scenes in all four Gospels, we see a lot of back and forth. Like, they take Jesus to Pilate. Then Pilate sends him to Herod. Then Herod sends him back to Pilate. And you might think to yourself, how is all of this happening in the wee hours of the morning? Like, how does all of this transpire so quickly that Jesus ends up on a cross by 9 o'clock? 3 words: Passover and Herod's palace. As we've said, the Passover was a time when everybody came to Jerusalem to celebrate, including the current governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, and the current Roman ruler over Galilee, Herod Antipas. This is also the Herod who was responsible for the decapitation of John the Baptizer a few years before. Now, Pontius Pilate is not Jewish. Herod claims to be half Jewish, depending on the day. They are both in town on holiday, and they are staying in the same place, the lap of luxury known as Herod the Great's palace. During the 1st century BC, about 20 years before Jesus was born, Herod the Great, who is Herod Antipas' father, funded an expansive capital campaign to renovate the temple, which is why it is sometimes called Herod's temple. But also, during this time, Herod also built himself a palace. Now, since this, Herod the Great has passed away, but now, when any big government officials come to town, this is where they stay. So, when we read that Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas, chances are he sent him down the hall or to another area of the palace, because it was not a long commute. Now remember, all of these people had a big meal and a late night the day before. And it's roughly 5 in the morning. Jesus' accusers take him to the entrance of Herod's palace. They, ring the doorbell. And I imagine Pilate being awakened by a servant. And Pilate walks out onto his porch in his royal bathrobe like, "What do you people want? Why are you bringing me this man?" And they're like, "He's a criminal." And Pilate says, "Then take him away and judge him by your own law." Pilate's like, "We're not Jewish here." But then they say, "Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone." Now this gets Pilate's attention. This isn't just a misdemeanor situation, apparently. So you see Pilate bring Jesus in and begin questioning him. And Pilate sees no problem with this guy. Now, does Jesus say some bizarre, seemingly vague things? Sure. But Pilate's like, "I find him guilty of nothing." The religious leaders won't back down, but luckily, during their conversation, Pilate finds out that Jesus is from Galilee, north of Judea. So Pilate's like, "Great. Herod is down the hall right now. That is his jurisdiction. Just wake Herod up and have him deal with it." Now, initially, this thrills Herod Antipas, because he has been trying to meet Jesus ever since Luke chapter 9. So, as Luke 23 tells us, when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. Now, two things about the Herod family from history. Number one, they had huge egos. Huge. Number two, they were violent bullies. Herod meets Jesus, and Jesus gives him the silent treatment. So initially, Herod was excited to see a miracle maybe while he ate his bacon and eggs, but now Jesus has just pissed him off. So, how should we get a response out of this famous teacher who now says nothing? This is when the horrible games begin. Herod's like, oh, they say you're a king, huh? Well, let's dress you up. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. Now, all of this gears up quickly because a few years earlier, as a way of adding excitement to the Passover, as well as creating a scare tactic that would help maintain order while all of these people are in Jerusalem, Pilate began the tradition of pardoning someone. Now, crucifixions didn't happen every day, but they were set to happen on this day. And the crowd was going to get to vote on one person who would be set free and spared, kind of like an upside down Hunger Games or a Survivor episode from hell. On this day, that man would end up being a convicted murderer and insurrectionist rather than Jesus. The Gospels are very clear that Pilate did not believe that Jesus should die. In fact, he tried very hard to save him. But the threats, the rioting, the blackmail caused by the religious leaders just proved to be too much. So around 8 a.m. on that Good Friday morning, Pilate handed Jesus over to his soldiers, and those soldiers seemed to take the game Herod began and kick it up a notch. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him away to crucify him. In this moment, as in many moments of our world, the powers of darkness seem to reign. Death, evil, wickedness, it all seems to be winning, but only for a time. The rightful king will overcome, and he will claim his throne. But first, there will be pain. As you study more about these middle of the night hours each day of this session, may you be constantly reminding yourself that even in the darkest night, hope will come. The light will shine again. I love you, friend. Stick with us every day, and I will see you soon.